welcome. This is episode 1 of Dualistic Unity Social.
Oh yeah, this is fucking awesome. This is cool. All right, I'm seeing our live on Instagram now too. So, yeah, this is exciting. It looks really good on Instagram too. Kind of impressive how they've been able to do that, and it actually looks quite nice. And I'm sure our audio sounds great having microphones and everything. Holy shit, this is awesome. I had a question to kind of kick things off. This is not related to anything we've been talking about today, but when you take a gummy, have you ever gotten a headache
Yes.
afterwards?
Yes. And
Okay.
again, that's something to remember that some strains, depending on the person, will actually create kind of a headache. I think headaches often come down to tension. Like one thing I've noticed is that if I have a headache, it's usually because I'm resisting something or I'm just having this low level of tension underneath it. And so I kind of try and work through that. That said, though, that doesn't always work because sometimes you just have a headache.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very fair. But yeah, I don't get them very often. So when I get them, it's like very, very aware. But at the same time, there's definitely some resistance going on to it, wishing that it wasn't happening as much. But yeah, like I was saying, I took that one last night. It was a pretty interesting experience. But yeah, like all morning I've had a headache. So I'm curious. I guess that makes sense. Because some of the side effects of certain strains is a headache. Like sometimes it can help alleviate a headache, but sometimes it can actually cause one. I guess it
Sometimes, I mean, especially if
yeah
you have dry eyes or something like that can lead to a headache as well.
yeah yeah. Where okay? So on Restream in terms of comments. Oh shit, there it is. Okay, I have that tab open already as well. Um,
Just for
so
everybody who's aware of what we're doing at the moment, if you want to join us on twitch.tv/dualistic unity, we're much more likely to see your comments because we can put them here in the chat overlay. We're also watching on our Instagram feed. Of course, if we can answer those questions, we'd like to do that as well. But if you'd like to join us on Twitch, there's definitely much more in terms of interaction and community members that we're always streaming to our Discord community as well. If you would like to join our Discord, then there's a lot of topics and a lot of discussions that you can get into there. So I just kind of want to talk about a lot of what we've been talking about lately in regards to, I guess, discomfort. The fact that discomfort and change often go hand in hand, that discomfort is in fact leaving the familiar, because we use the word discomfort, but what are we really trying to say? And it's really just that things feel unfamiliar and we don't believe in ourselves. We don't think that we can do it. And we have this perception that it's too much. And so we go through this, I guess, process of recognizing that's not the case. I mean, this is ultimately the process of learning, right? We get into something, we feel overwhelmed with all the information, and then day by day, little by little, bit by bit, we pick up more about that thing, and it becomes kind of obvious. We're like, oh wow, why did this ever bother me before? And it's because it was unfamiliar. And so there's the discomfort of feeling like you don't know. And the only reason that is so uncomfortable is because you feel like you should know. You feel like you should know everything. But what are you trying to know? Are you trying to know the future? Are you trying to know all the considerations? Or are you knowing the one thing that you have to be, which is here now? It's you. That's all it is. Self knowledge is not a concept. We've talked about this before. And as long as we rely on the concept of self knowledge, we end up running in circles because we can always doubt that concept. A concept can be proven wrong. Reality is not even trying to be right.
yeah, well said. And that idea of should, like I should know something that I don't, or I should have something figured out, or this should be happening differently than it is. It's always settling upon assumptions and false certainties and all of that. But when you break it down, like the only thing you can know is that you're here now. Like that's the only certainty that it exists in all of reality is that you're just here now. And so all of our discomfort stems from a lack of recognition of that. Like it stems from thinking that things should be different, or I should know something that I don't. And that raw uncertainty of stepping into something where you don't really know how it's playing out or what's going on is intense. There's an extreme intensity to that. And like I was talking earlier today, like last night, I took a gummy before bed. It's like a sleep focused gummy, and was just kind of toying around with where my attention went, especially in regards to my body, and just going through different areas of my body somewhere there's some pain or discomfort, and like digging in to that, because we maintain the perspective that like our awareness exists inside of our mind, inside of our head, like, and the way we see things is through our eyes, and the way we smell things through our nose. But that awareness that we are, like, it's everywhere all the time. So that especially includes throughout our body, like it's always there. And we don't realize how, as we shift our attention to other parts of our body, we can actually hone all of it in there. And so something that I was just kind of wondering about, because I did something to my knee the other day, and I'm not really sure what it is, but I was just, if there is some ligament damage or a slight tear in something, like, we have this assumption that you look up an injury and it's like, oh, recovery time is like 4 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks. But how much is of that is based around an assumption that time always moves the same, and everything that has been will continue to be in that way? And could it be that, something like a healing process, just as an example, is dependent upon how much attention you're willing to give to that spot? Like, there's always a degree of attention, and as you're feeling your whole body, that attention is spread throughout the body. But if you hone that attention in to a specific part, could that accelerate a healing process that's already in play? Because we're constantly going through different scenarios and situations, and like, as soon as you injure something, the healing process has already begun. But the stress and resistance we experience kind of hinders that process in a way. But if you let go of that, if you recognized that there is a point in time where you are completely healed, and the ability to get to that point is dependent upon how much attention and how little stress you experience along the way. And it's like those two things kind of pushing and pulling at each other, the amount of attention that we give and the amount of stress and resistance we have just in general that we're experiencing in our body. And so if that's the case, then if you don't experience as much stress, if you recognize that there's a point in which something is healed, or a situation does play out in a specific way, or an injury heals, then could you not accelerate that process? And then, as I was wondering that, I was like focusing my attention on that specific spot. And then I was kind of wondering, because there's always in the back of my head, like, just being skeptical, like, am I trying to control something? Am I trying to get a specific outcome based on my perspective? And like, who's to say that this thing healing quicker is a better case outcome? But it's it's not even that. It's almost just like a willingness to give it the attention and find out, because I think a lot of what we do just slows those processes. And so healing processes take a very long time because we have so much in the way. And so I didn't come to any conclusion, but it was an interesting experience, as always. Like, not really a conclusion, but I don't know, it makes me wonder, just when it comes to the body and how it's always trying to protect itself, heal itself, and there's so many things that we put in the way of that process. So if you step out of the way, but then also give the attention to it without even a specific need for a specific outcome, like, who's to say that process couldn't be closer to an immediate shift, as opposed to something that is sparsed out over weeks or months, or even years. No worries. You're
So
good.
we actually talked about this previously, and the reason I asked you to hold on is because I wanted to pull up the QR code here for anybody who's looking. But we've talked about the placebo effect. We've talked about the fact that hospitals, for example, will actually encourage people who have the initial stages of cancer, or who have just discovered that they have cancer, to actually have a positive mentality about that. And the reason is because that is the first line of defense in terms of their immune system, and the hospital knows that it is in fact your mentality that helps the healing process. And then you look at things like Reiki, for example. And I know immediately it's like, oh, energy healing. Regardless of what you might think about it, the fact is that there is ample evidence that it does help with the healing process, that it in fact does speed the recovery process. And why? Only because there's attention on it. That's really all it is. There's an alignment with it. You're not trying to heal anything. You're just admitting that you're a part of it. For anybody wondering, there was actually a community topics episode. I think it's 30 or 31 that is about Reiki and the concept of energy healing, all the fluff and the bullshit, as opposed to what you might actually get out of it in terms of an insight, just regarding your own biology, regarding the awareness of your own body, the awareness of your awareness and how much of a role it does play, because it does. You will notice that when you are under stress, you get sick more often, right? Well, why is that? Well, because your body can't handle all that stress and it starts to collapse a little bit underneath the pressure. You can lessen that stress by just removing all of the shit that you're over invested in that really doesn't have any useful value to you whatsoever, but it's just habitual and caught in some illusion that it matters, because it indicates how much value you have, which is a laughable concept at the end of the day. And so all of a sudden you start to recognize the more you relax, the healthier you tend to be. Well, the healthier you tend to be, the more your body tends to heal faster as well.
Yeah, so with that attention, because coming from the, perspective of not trying to maintain a degree of control or questioning that, like, why do I want, this process to happen quicker than it is, and just being skeptical of that whole thing as I can tend to do. It's not really that, because it's already a process in place. Like, it's already something that's happening. Like, it's always happening. And it's just the amount of attention or lack of attention that determines how well or how poorly it happens, or how quickly or how slowly that it happens. Because if you understand that through stress and tension and all of that, there's very little attention being paid to what actually is. And that's why when people are stressed out, they're having a bad day. It's like everyone knows about those spirals of bad days. Oh, I'm having such a bad day. And then we mull over a thing that happened. We're not paying as much attention. A worse thing happens. And then it continues. A worse thing happens. A worse thing happens. And it just cycles into that. And so, because it's our lack of attention that continues that process, when we're caught up in bullshit illusions, basically, like caught up in a conceptual idea of yourself, caught up in what things mean about you, caught up trying to find a certainty outside of just what is here and now, outside of just paying attention, that if you do just hone in to paying attention to something that is real here and now, it would it's almost like it doesn't accelerate the process. We just do a lot of things to hinder the process at all times, like healing, for example. There there could be a spot in which you get an injury that almost everyone who's ever recovered from it takes 3 months to recover. But that's because we have common assumptions about ourselves, common ways of living that cause it to take that long, whereas without so much in the way, could take a month. So it's not an acceleration from the baseline. The experiences that we have and our lack of ability to heal, or continued process of getting sick, are well below baseline because of all the things that we're holding on to. So it's kind of like being at the bottom of the ocean with a bunch of weight and just releasing the weight to come back to surface to get some air. Whereas we have the perspective, oh, I'm giving this attention, so I'm accelerating the process. And it's like, yeah, relative to typically when you have a lot of shit in the way, when you have a lot of shit hindering it, but it's not an acceleration. It's just a relative acceleration because we're so used to having so much shit in the way.
And that's it. And you can kind of see it in our habits, right? Like often we'll talk about different habits and we'll go like, oh, that's an unhealthy habit and that's an unhealthy habit and this is what leads to the deterioration of our health. It's like, right, but all of those unhealthy habits are ultimately coming from a place. Like they're coming from a place where they're being enacted because of some avoidance, right? So they're just some symbolic representation of your mentality. And this is why we delve into these quote unquote bad habits. And the only reason they're bad is because they're repetitive and they overpower us, or rather, we perceive them to be stronger than us. This is where addiction comes from, right? And it's just the escape and that habitual perception of yourself that's creating it. This is why you feel disempowered. And this is why you're giving that thing more power than you, because your perception of yourself as being disempowered. In order for you to get over that, you have to find your power, as it were, which is to recognize that everything that you're experiencing in your mind is in fact the product of your mind, that you are stronger by virtue of it not being able to exist without you.
Yeah, and so those bad habits that we attain over the years, they're just they're always just sort of coping mechanisms, right? For the alternative being that we don't know, or that we don't actually have that degree of certainty that we really, really want to have. And so whenever we have a bad habit, we just kind of continue it, and we look at it instead of what we're avoiding, instead of the uncertainty that we're avoiding. So we look at the bad habit and think, "Oh, I have to get rid of this bad habit or that bad habit." And it's the same with addiction. Like, we look at the surface level addiction because, I don't know, they're kind of similar, bad habits and addictions, right? If not basically the same thing. And it's always an avoidance of something, be it at its core, like the avoidance of the reality of uncertainty and the discomfort that comes with that. And so we come up with ways of mitigating that experience. And there's always going to be a cost because we're attaching to something that isn't real so much. We're attaching to an assumption, we're attaching to a certain perspective that isn't here now. And so it allows us to kind of feel like we can escape that without actually doing so. And because we're not actually escaping anything, there's just going to be more and more repercussions to not paying attention to what is. But it's like a cost we're willing to pay because we just want to avoid that uncertainty at all costs. And we'll run from it basically forever with no regard for wondering what it would be like if we stopped doing so and finding out what lies in that uncertainty.
We are blinded by our opinion of discomfort at the end of the day, and because we identify ourselves with our opinion, it's my opinion. We never think to let it go. It's a blind spot for us. It's a significant blind spot for us. Wanted to say, because again, this is Dualistic Unity Social. Welcome, everyone. We see comments on Instagram here and there, and we see comments in the thread on Twitch and YouTube and whatnot. So if you are here, hi, you are welcome to ask questions, and we are going to do our best to address them. We have about 40 minutes left of this episode, as well as I'll throw some stuff up on the screen from time to time because we've got some great quotes and we're trying out this new format. But yeah, welcome, and do participate as much as you'd like because this is what we're here for. It's DU Social.
Yeah. So getting into some more of the stuff we've been talking about today, especially in the groups, just it's been interesting and like not surprising, but also kind of fascinating to see how many people are having similar degrees of an experience and how much we just take everything so personally and so we're so involved. And this is something else I've been catching myself saying. Hopefully I remember where the fuck that path was going, but I'll say we're so concerned about things and blah blah blah. And it's just me. I'm so concerned about things. This is a conversation I had with someone last week. We make there I go saying it again. But I'm people can tend to make the assumption that everyone is maintaining the same perspective of them. Someone was talking about a shared experience that I had with that person and explaining how it went and how it went from the perspective of the group. And as they were saying it, it was just hitting me very, very clearly how much we say we or oh the situation went like this, oh that event went this way or that event went that way, and we all had a great time. It's just we're always just expressing our point of view. It's just our perception. And we use other people to validate that perception and say, oh, this situation, and like comparing situations. Oh, this situation, like, oh, this happened there, and this there was an intensity to this, and we all experience this sort of thing. It's like, that's just you. Like, we make the assumption that everyone else experienced something very similar, but we don't know that. But it provides us with that sense of comfort, that false certainty, if everyone else is experiencing it as well. And so we use the terms like we as if it is actually a thing that we can be certain of, and it never actually is. And so it's been interesting catching myself doing that, and interesting hearing other people do it, because when I was talking to that person, they kept saying we, and they didn't even realize all they were doing was expressing their perspective of the situation, thinking that it was like being hidden by it being the perspective of the group. So they didn't think they were giving anything away or giving away their perspective, because it's like, oh yeah, it's we experience this. No, just it's just that's just your perspective of how it went. I could ask someone else who was in that situation, and there's almost 0% chance they're going to perfectly align with your perspective. But that's uncomfortable for us to recognize, that not everyone always has the same perspective. And that's the same for everything. Like how our ideas of trees or water or nature or reality or ourselves are always going to be different than everyone else's perspective of that. Even if it's just a tiny little slightly different perspective, even like how tall you are, that shifts your perspective. Like there's so many variables in our experience, and we try and assume that it's all the same and gonna be the same for everyone, and it never is. But we don't like that. I don't like that.
That's it. I don't like that. And this goes to a question that somebody asked: how do you consciously decide to embrace that uncertainty? Recognize that there is no certainty. That's really it. You're not trying to embrace uncertainty. You are uncertain. That's reality. That's the reality. And all you have is delusion on top of that and the fear of the reality. No, I'm certain. Name one thing that you're certain of that can't change. The sun will come up tomorrow. Yeah, until it doesn't. Right? Like there is no certainty in anything. Everything is change. It's not that things are changing. Life is change, and we are change. And any sense of certainty that we have is the assumption of an endpoint, and it's just not. That's just not the case. And so, how do you accept uncertainty and just recognize that certainty is a fiction? It's kind of like the like control. How do you get over having a control fixation? Recognize that you never actually have it. And that is ultimately the biggest fear of people who are fixated on control, losing it, because they know it's impossible to outrun. It's impossible. It's impossible to have total control. There will always be something you did not account for. There will always be something you did not expect. That is the fiction of control, that it can be had at all.
And that's where so much of our suffering comes from, is the assumption that there can be certainty, that there can be control, as opposed to relinquishing that perspective and understanding that it never existed to begin with. Like typically when people experience anxiety, it's because we have the perspective that we had control at a point and now we feel like we're losing it. But if you understand that from the very beginning, you never had any control, you never had any certainty, then those experiences where it's kind of shoved in your face, like you don't have control here, you don't have certainty here, they're not as jarring, because it's just par for the course. You never had certainty, you never had control. So it isn't as jarring, it's just a continued unraveling and deepening into that experience of uncertainty or control, as opposed to convincing yourself that you have it at certain points and then feeling like you're losing it at other points. And that's always where it comes from, is the assumption that we have it to begin with. So aligning with uncertainty, recognizing uncertainty, is just recognizing reality. That's all it is. Like coming back to what's actually real is the experience of uncertainty, and just coming to terms with that. Like you never knew. You never know. You never have control. You never know what tomorrow's going to bring, or what something means, or where someone's coming from. Like you don't know any of it ever. Like that's the baseline. And we just layer a bunch of shit on top of that, thinking that we could. And there's consequences to it all the time.
There's a need behind it, though. Like that's really what it is. At the end of the day, it's just because the alternative is terrifying. As long as we're thinking about ourselves. As soon as I rely on an idea of myself, there's the possibility that I'm not enough for whatever it is I'm facing, for the future or the next moment or whatever it might be, somebody's expectations. As soon as I'm thinking about it, I'm caught in this loop of self-image being truth. Obviously, what I think of myself is obviously what's possible, and my brain is just like, okay, and it creates an environment of options and opportunities based on the spectrum that I've defined through my self-image. And that's it. All of a sudden, I'm bound in this noose that I've created without even knowing it. Right. And it's all just because I stopped to go, can I do that? Rather than just doing it. Right. Because that's how we do things, isn't it? Isn't that how we learn everything? Right. It's just to go step by step until it settles in, until there's a moment of recognition. This is what they drill us with sheet after sheet after sheet of math fucking homework for. Do you know that? Because the ultimate hope is that through repetition alone, the brain will have an insight as to how that's working. That's all it is they're like, just keep repeating it until your brain goes, oh, and it has a recognition. Isn't that a terrible way of learning? But that is ultimately what we're doing all the time. The only thing that they're not teaching us is the quality of attention, which is why math is so very hard to learn for so many people who hate school, because all they're thinking is, I'd rather not be here. Right. So they're frustrated. They're judging themselves. And all of a sudden, there's all of this me that's in the way of the math. Right. And that's when it becomes impossible to focus on the math. And we're not taught the quality of attention, the importance of being here in the moment with all of our attention and our awareness in it. Instead, we're taught to think about ourselves, and instead we're taught to judge our progress, to compare ourselves to everybody else, to establish some sense of value that ultimately can't be established, because you can change. You are change. Regardless of what you tell yourself is possible, you could go in a direction right now, follow it for a year, and end up somewhere you never thought would be fucking possible. And that happens all the time. Does our brain take that in? No. Why? Because it's uncertain, and it means there might be danger.
And, oh, man, it's just crazy how all of these things, like, even knowing yourself, the assumption that we can do that, we settle upon that, and then there's repercussions to that. Like, defining if I define myself and maintain an assumption of where my value lies, immediately I'm in comparison. I'm in judgment. I'm in self judgment. I'm in judgment of other people because I'm maintaining a bullshit illusion that I'm at all separate from anything. And so that experience of, flow state or whatever you want to call it is just not maintaining a false certainty of what you are, of what you could conceptually be, like where your value lies, and all of that. As much as we've been talking a lot about how when the story of you is not just a conceptual idea, but it's everything that you do, say, the way that you act, all of it is a component of your idea of yourself. But when yeah, it all stems from an underlying assumption that your value is something that can be measured. Like all of those components of everything that you are, your actions, the way you see things, came from the assumption that you're a conceptual idea, that you can know yourself as an idea. And then though all of those things were built upon that assumption that are still continuing to impact us or me as I go, but it's based on that assumption. And so in order to dig into those and see where they come from, and also not almost like not allow for more to be layered on top of that, like more trauma and all of those things to be added on top, you have to recognize that you're not a conceptual idea. So although there's so much more to you than just the idea, that is where the way, like the trauma responses and the ways that we do things, the way that we act and things that we say, and how we see other people or perceive certain situations, that's where all of it comes from, was because we had an idea and then we saw that drop. Like we had an idea of where our value lied and then we saw it drop. And that's where we had a response then to that. And so in order to mitigate that from continuing to happen, we have to let go of the illusion that we're something that can be thought about at all. And they go hand in hand because they're reinforcing each other. But as we defend those triggers, as we defend the ways that we act and say, oh, I'm just this way, like, oh, respect my triggers, it's like that's just reinforcing the story. I am someone who has these triggers, who responds in this way, who speaks this way, who acts this way, just reinforcing the bullshit story that never existed to begin with and reinforces all of the habits, all of the suffering that we experience because of those habits, as opposed to looking at it for what it is, recognizing that it was never the truth of what we were, but there was a lot built on top of that initial assumption that came when we were very, very young, that we tried to navigate the world through that. And that's how we learn. Like you were talking about learning, like putting one foot in front of the other, finding out. But that was a component of how we learned growing up, was dealing with traumatic situations or any type of situation. And then we just built from there. Like we built off of such a naive perspective of reality that when it goes unquestioned, we just continue to maintain. And that's why you have adults that act like little kids, because that's where they learned how to deal with the world, was at that point, and then they never questioned it. So they just built on top of that.
Because my opinion is important to me, right? Because it's me. We really do tie it together like that. Like that's it. At the end of the day, we set our own priorities, and often it's our opinion over reality, right? Because the opinion is ultimately what drives our emotional spectrum more often than not, right? Because it's largely based on our perception of ourselves, right? If something's happening, I'm going to form an opinion of it based on what I think about myself. I can do this. I can't do that. That's stupid. That's great. Really just comes down to how I perceive myself and my ability to adapt to that reality. But all I have to do is just stop thinking about it and find out, right? That's really it. And do that often enough, and it becomes second nature. Somebody was saying here that they're a dancer, and meditating and journaling helps them. Yeah, absolutely. Whatever helps you get into the process that you already are. But often we will hear a part of that process, usually something that's negative, but it could be something that's positive, and we'll just focus right in on it, and we'll interrupt it, and we'll create all kinds of thoughts about the process. We'll create an opinion about the process. Oh, I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling anxious. I'm not doing very well, so on and so forth. And all it's doing is bottlenecking that process. You're just adding more process on top of it, making it harder and harder for you to go through the lesson that's already being learned. Because it's already being learned. No matter what you do, the more you do it, the better your brain gets at it. But that also means the more you doubt yourself. That also means the more you doubt yourself, your brain will get good at that too.
Yeah, it's like process always going in one direction or the other, like doubt versus faith, conceptual idea versus reality. It's always that. And so if we're going through a certain situation, like take going through a rut in your life, like there is the experience that you're having, the feelings that you're feeling, and then you come up with an idea of what's happening that isn't actually what's happening, or label it in a certain way, saying, oh, I'm in a rut right now. And then you have an opinion about that and say, you feel very uncomfortable, and you settle upon that I'm uncomfortable, I'm experiencing, anxiety, whatever. And then you have an opinion about that experience, not the feeling itself, but what you've labeled it as. Like, say you're experiencing some discomfort, maybe some intense feelings. You can call them nerves, whatever, but it's the same again as excitement, as people tend to understand that. But then we call it something, and because we have an opinion, an overarching I keep saying we, and I keep catching myself as I say it. I have an opinion of anxiety that it's a bad thing. And so when I feel a certain thing, label it as anxiety, despite it not really being that. It's just a word that has a certain connotation to it, a negative connotation to it. Then because I've labeled it as that, I resist that and I fight that. That kind of perpetuates that process. But if you go back to the very beginning of just feeling the feeling and not immediately running to a false certainty about what it is, what it means about you, what it means about everything that you're going through, you just sit in it. There isn't the label for it. There isn't then the opinion of the label that you've provided it. And then there isn't the resistance to what you've labeled it as, or to the opinion that you have. Like, oh, this is a thing and this is bad, and therefore I have to get rid of this. There isn't all of those steps after the initial feeling. It's just you kind of cut it where it lies. You cut it at its root of just where it sits in reality, a feeling. Even calling it uncomfortable is a little bit of a presumptive statement, right? Like it just is something that is. Like discomfort versus comfort is just an assumption of where we think it falls. And so then there's all of these things that these these actions that we take post that assumption because we believe that to be true, objective truth. And then the process goes, and it kind of, based on the initial assumption, just goes in a certain direction. But the assumption's bullshit to begin with. But we don't want to look at that. I don't want to look at that.
Nice catch. We have a couple of questions that tie into this, and they actually tie to each other. How do you deal with self-doubt? Just recognizing and accepting it, as well as isn't perspective necessary for the dualistic experience to happen? So here's the thing: every experience that you're having, each and every challenge that you face, there is a perspective that you can take where it sucks, it's arduous, it seems impossible, and you feel overwhelmed, and a perspective you take where you're just taking it one step at a time, not doubting yourself at all, and it's going by just fine. Both of those perspectives and everything in between exist as possible perceptions of yourself and the reality that you're experiencing. That entire spectrum, all of those shades, millions, billions, trillions, infinite amounts of perceptions of this one experience that you're having right now are available to you all the time. And that's what this is that we tend to pick one and focus on it like it's the truth because it's the one that we've picked and focused on. That is the case with perception. Whichever one we focus on becomes the reality that we're experiencing. But it's accepting that they're all valid. They're all valid from the point of view of the perceiver, which means none of them are truth in itself. That is what we're talking about in terms of expanding your awareness. It's expanding your awareness of all of the things that you could be and are ultimately experiencing here and now. It's just your focus that swivels.
Yeah, and so as we, that feeling of overwhelm always comes from making an assumption about a situation or thinking of a situation like from a large point of view. Like we turn a moment into, oh, this is a whole thing, this is a whole situation, and it's all assumption. Like it's all future focused and trying to find a false certainty that doesn't exist. And so the further out we go trying to find certainty in the next step, or 10 steps down or 100 steps down, that certainly doesn't exist. It gets overwhelming because we have the perspective that it's bigger than it is, but it's still just here now. And that's the shift, I think, kind of just like you were referencing with the self-doubt. It's like, can you take one more step, or do you feel like you have to take 100 steps at once? Because if you feel like you have to take 100 steps at once, you can't take the 100th step before you take the 10th step, and you can't take the 10th before you take the first. And so those steps don't exist until you take the first one. But we kind of have the perspective that we can know, or because we so badly want to know how the situation's going, how things are playing out. Even with, dualistic unity, people will ask us, like, what are your goals? What are your long-term goals? Like, we don't fucking know, because we don't know how step 100 is going to be. What can we do right now? Like, what do we know? We know what we're doing right now. And so if that's not our focus, then it can, of course, feel like it's overwhelming, because we're making so many assumptions to make the situation turn into something bigger than it actually is, because we're making an assumption about how things are playing out or where things are going, because we feel like we need that certainty. We need that control to know how tomorrow's going to go, or next week's going to go, or next month's going to go. And the cost is the overwhelming feeling of something being bigger than it is, because we're making it bigger than it is. It's never actually that size. It's never the 100 steps or even the 10 steps. It's just the one that you're on, and that's all that there ever is. But because we don't like the fact that we I keep saying we, realizing how much I do it, and we I don't like maintaining the idea of it not knowing what the second step is going to be before the first. We I I'm just going to keep saying we because I can't keep catching myself all the time. It's
It's uncomfortable, isn't it?
yeah. Uh, and so because I don't like where the second one, not knowing the second step before the first, I come up with all of these assumptions about what the second and third and fourth steps going to be. But as I take those in, as I make those assumptions, the situation gets so much bigger than it is. And then it feels overwhelming. But nothing is actually as overwhelming as we perceive it to be. It's just my desire for false certainty that causes it to feel overwhelming because it isn't your idea of the thing isn't the thing. Your idea of the situation isn't the reality of what's actually happening. The only thing you know is what's happening right now.
I don't even know that. I'm just what is happening right now. That's what we mean by know. Yeah, that's where the trick really is. Like whenever we're like, I know. What do you mean by that? You mean the idea in your head? No. What you do know is the experience that you are. That's what you know. As soon as you think about it, that's not it. You've left it. Right. And so it's just continue on. Like, perfect example, what we're doing right now. Like, we're live streaming, we're talking about this stuff. I mean, half of it, people are going to be like, this is weird and deep, and I don't like it. It's making me uncomfortable, and they're leaving. We don't know those people. We don't know what they're going to do. We don't know where they're at in their journey. We don't know what they're going to do next. We don't know any of that stuff. We don't know anybody who's about anything about anybody who's in the room right now. Hello, everyone. Right? We don't know. So why are we doing it? Because we are. We are. That's it. Because we are. We exist. We are the doing. This is what reality is. That's all we have to do. But we keep trying to think about it. Like there's some way to establish whether we're doing well. It's like you're doing. That's existence. That is the bar for existence. That doing can happen.
And isn't it funny how I can't I keep saying we, and I know that. Like I'll be I'm just gonna keep saying I know, I guess. I'll be in a conversation and make an assumption about how someone is perceiving the conversation to be going and kind of handcuff myself because I've made an assumption that they're thinking of it in a certain way, only to find out that they're not at all thinking about it in that way. But it's almost more comfortable for me to assume that I know how they think it's going as opposed to recognizing that I don't, that I never do, that we could have 100 people on this live stream and I have no idea what any of them are thinking about it. I can never know. And yet I judge myself and think that everyone else is seeing things in the same exact way as I am when they never ever are. And so we can never actually know. We're just the situation unfolding. Like I can never have any degree of certainty about what someone else thinks or someone else's perspective or opinion or judgment. Even when they say it, it's not a guarantee that that's it. It could just be them trying to feel better themselves and expressing something that they think is going to sound better to someone else. Like, even when it's said directly, we still can't know with absolute certainty, right? It's
I think it
just,
depends what we're looking or what we're listening for, right? Like I told you early on in the podcast, by the way, everyone, if you haven't checked out the Dualistic Unity podcast, logos up there, do check it out. Season 1, it's fantastic. But I was talking about the fact that it's not about what people are saying, it's why they're saying it. Okay, so somebody can come up to you and tell you a whole bunch of details about their life, their day, why they're a victim, all the things that are working against them, and everything else in the world. And what they're really telling you is how they're dealing with uncertainty. That's all they're telling you. That's all everyone is telling you is how they are dealing with, interpreting, and coping with uncertainty, because that's reality. So are you listening to the details or are you listening to where it's coming from? because where it's coming from is the person that you're trying to interact with. And that's where empathy comes in, is recognizing what they're talking about, why they're talking about it, what they're really communicating, whether they're aware of it or not. Because we are all communicating how the fuck we are dealing with this thing called life.
So it's always where they're coming from. It's not even the words aren't really even relevant. Like someone judges you, even if it's direct, like you're fucking annoying. Like that's coming from a spot. And being able to see, it's almost like you got to be willing to see beyond the words and look at it, but most people don't want to dig in to that
No, because
and
I'm
where it's
afraid of being
actually.
perceived negatively. So when you say I'm annoying, my knee jerk response is to feel shitty about that and then blame myself rather than ask you, or rather ask myself, well, why do you have such a conflict with me? Like, there might be actually some reason that I am annoying, that I'm dealing with my own shit, but why can't you align with that, empathize with that, come to some degree of clarity about that, or communicate it in a way where we can work through it together? Why is it something that you have to assault, something that you have to attack, something that you have to make go away? Why is it something you have to fix? Where is this conflict and this need to settle something and make it go away coming from? That's the question, right? I don't want to grow. I don't want to change. So I need you to change for me.
Because I don't actually know if someone's annoying, right? That's just an assumption that I'm making. Oh, fuck.
Subjective call entirely.
Yeah. Like, oh, how quick we are to do that. And that's where, gossip comes from, is from a group of people making the same bullshit assumption as everyone else, saying, "Oh, that person's so weird. Oh, you think that person's weird? I think they're weird too." And that's just them settling upon a false certainty about that person that doesn't actually exist. That's just a minuscule perspective based on probably a very small situation that you're basing that off of. And so even when someone is direct, it's their avoidance of the reality of the uncertainty, not being able to know you. Oh, man.
So this ties into a question. I'm going to address this quickly. And again, I want to make it very clear that I give answers that are as direct as possible. I'm not the kind of person who sugarcoats it, because frankly, I think strength is good for you, and it is for me as a whole. Can you speak on how to find a sense of community in a hyper individualistic culture that makes us spend all of our time working? Absolutely. Stop looking for a community. Start living for yourself. Start living for your own sense of freedom, for your own sense of choice, for your own sense of awareness. Start living for you. And the people who are doing the same thing, you will resonate with them when you find them. But if you start looking for them, then you're just operating from need, and you're just going to find needy people who will take advantage of you.
Oh, man. Yeah. How funny is that? That, because that's based on an assumption too, like the assumption that I need other people. And so that's going to be a need. And then we're going to act in a way in order to find that. And it's not even about finding other people. It's about satisfying your perceived need, as if you could possibly know that that's what's going to do it. It's like, I don't feel whole in myself. I need other people. I need community. And so it's not to say, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that necessarily, but it's something to be mindful of. It's something to be mindful of, where is that coming from? Where is that assumption that you need other people? We've posted before about the difference between want and need. And a lot of people are really fucking confused about that, because needs are, put yourself on a deserted island by yourself. What do you need? Water, food, some degree of shelter. It's about it. And people have layered into that fucking mixing bowl, like, I need other people. Oh, I need social interaction. Humans, we're social beings. It's a need. It's like, no, it's not. It isn't actually a need, but because we assume that and aren't willing to look at where that's coming from, we try and satisfy it in whatever way we can, but it's never actually been a need. And I had something else that I wanted to take that in a direction, and I totally forgot where it was going, but
That's okay.
oh,
There's no need.
man. Ah, that's the beauty of it, right? Because when you realize like you don't need anything, it starts happening. But until then, until you're willing to look at what your perceived needs are, you're not willing to face that that is just an assumption that you're making and trying to satisfy. Probably because as a kid or teenager, you didn't feel like you felt very isolated and you were told there was something wrong with that. And so because you felt like there was something wrong with that, you felt like there was something wrong with you, and then try and find other people and just make the assumption that that's a need in order to validate our actions because we perceive it to be a need. As soon as it's a need, anything we do to get it is validates it, you know? Yeah. Huh.
Absolutely. This is why when I first, quote unquote, woke up, which really just means recognized that I had a say in my own life, that it wasn't necessarily dancing to the tune that everybody else apparently was dancing to and expected everyone else to dance to, and so on and so forth. That's really all it means by waking up. It's like, oh, my life is mine. Shit, I have to do something with this, right? And that's really all it is. But one of the biggest things that I kept facing was need, right? The need to feel like I know what's happening, the need to feel valuable, the need to feel right, the need to feel certain, the need, to feel loved, the need to feel important. All of this stuff, you're just like, Jesus Christ, I'm always thinking about these perceived needs. And at the end of the day, they're just perceptions, right? Perceptions that help me avoid the reality, which is who I am right now. And that's the only way that we can actually start moving with alignment in our life, is to come back to our life. But that means to get out of the illusion of our life, which is all of our preconceived notions, our fears, our perceptions, our needs, all of them. It's all that background soundtrack that we're putting on top of the stuff that's already being processed. And we wonder why we're confused. Right? Our brain's always chewing on everything we've ever experienced. And then we're like, yeah, but I think this about that. And I think this about that. No, I don't like that memory. And this is why I don't like that memory. And we're just adding noise. It would be like if there was a song playing and then every person who was listening to the song started talking over it about their opinion of the song. Would you hear the song? Would the song have any impact on you whatsoever? No, because you can't hear it. And if whatever you can hear, you can't fully appreciate, right? Because there's so much distortion. And it's all from all that needless fucking opinion. And all you have to do is just shut up and listen, and it will change you.
Ooh, I like that example a lot. Have you used that one before?
I doubt it.
That was really good one because that's just it. Is like reality is the song playing, and our perception of reality is our opinion of the song. And even just in that example, as you actually start to listen to the music, it's going to start to change your perception of everything because you're actually hearing what's going on as opposed to the overlaid buzz of perception. And everyone's pointing to it like, oh, that's a good song. That's a bad song. Like that doesn't exist. A good or a bad song doesn't actually exist. It's just your opinion. It's just your perception. And that can be uncomfortable to recognize. Like those things don't exist in objectivity. The ones that we as a collective say are just sticking with songs like good or bad songs is just collective assumption that causes us to hear things differently. Like if we were to actually just listen to a song without so much of an opinion, we may realize that the songs that we think that we like change because we hear certain songs and then we're like, oh, I like this type of music. I like that type of music. And so if something doesn't fit that, then we kind of avoid it because we'd rather have that false certainty of knowing what kind of music we like than being willing to listen and just listen without so much of an opinion.
Yeah. But, if I'm not constantly validating and confirming who am I? Oh my God. And that's it. It's just this ongoing thing. Like if I were to stop evaluating my value, I'd have none. That's our assumption. Dear God, if I ever stop thinking about myself, I'll fade away. And it's like, no, because you are what is. You are reality. You're not the thought that you're holding on to. This is why people are terrified of death, right? They're terrified of the end of the idea of themselves. Because if they got past the idea of themselves, they'd recognize that they are life itself. We have a question here before we wrap up. We have 2 minutes left. How are we to balance needing external validation to self-validation? This one's really, really easy. There is nothing wrong with validation except that it reaffirms needing validation. That is all it is. It's a perpetual loop. If you're validating your self-image, or if other people are validating your self-image and you're paying attention to it as something that's valuable and important, and you should be holding on to that idea of yourself as valid, you're already fucked. Because now you have something that you have to protect. You have something that you're afraid of being torn down. You have something that you need to perpetuate, whether it's yourself or other people. You're already investing in the illusion that is not you. Fact is, it doesn't matter what you tell yourself or what anybody else tells you. You are not that. You are not that. And the only way to find out what you are is to watch yourself unfold. So just go do it.
Oh, yeah, it is really a crazy cycle, right? Like the need, and it's so interesting when people will say, "Oh, nothing wrong with a little validation," but that begins the cycle as soon as it happens. Like if you think that you're more or better or anything because of any degree of validation, you're going to continue to crave that, and it is addictive behavior. Validation, needing people to see you in a certain way. As that drops off, then you're just being you out there. Like as soon as there's any draw for the validation, it really is like being addicted to a drug. Like it's probably the same. If you can measure it, there's probably the same sort of internal
You're banking on the
response.
cessation of pain. Whatever the source of your happiness is becomes an addiction until it's you.
Mm, well said. Damn. Well, this has been
This
a lot of fun.
so much fun. The first episode of Dualistic Unity Social has been a blast. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Of course, we will be posting this as a podcast episode later on this evening. Dualistic Unity. If you haven't checked it out, check out season 1 and season 2. So much in terms of information, in terms of insights, and just recognitions, things that are applicable. Nothing you have to believe in, nothing that defines you, nothing you have to hold on to, just moments of oh. And then you take that with you. That's as simple as change is. Have a moment of recognition and you have changed, because you cannot unsee an insight. It has changed you. All you can do is run from it, which is an entirely different journey. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'll pass it over to Andrew to wrap this up, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. You never know how you're doing. You never know what progress you're making. You just never really know. So keep paying attention, keep finding out. There's nothing to figure out. There's nothing to solve. There's nothing to fix. It's just you being you. And I appreciate you very much and appreciate everyone for tuning in. And we'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone.